Hello, everybody. Professor Barth here, Associate Professor of History at Arizona State University. Welcome to part 4 of our section on Thomas Hobbes, itself part of a larger lecture series on the foundations of Western political thought. If you haven't seen part 1 yet, you're going to want to do so. It was an introduction video into Thomas Hobbes and Leviathan. And in parts 2 and 3, I took a look at the historical context, and you're going to want to watch that as well. Hobbes published Leviathan in 1651, just at the end of the English Civil War. We talk about that in part 3 of this series. Today we're going to dive into the text and see what Hobbes has to say about human nature and natural right and natural law. Hobbes publishes Leviathan in 1651, and he has a whole lot to say on human nature and on government. In part 5 we'll take a look at social contract, the covenant, the mutual covenant of every man with every man in creating a commonwealth. Today we're going to take a look at, again, nature. And keep in mind these discussion questions. If you want, you can answer them below in the comments. Does Hobbes accurately describe the state of nature? Ask yourself that as you watch this video. Number 2, does natural right include, as Hobbes argues, the liberty of the individual to pursue any and all measures to preserve one's own life? And then thirdly, does natural law ultimately and necessarily result in the mutual transferring of right to a sovereign power? Those are 3 discussion questions. Feel free to answer in the comments below. But first, on the natural condition of mankind, this is probably one of the 2 most famous arguments in Hobbes's book. Of course, social contract is the other major argument, but Hobbes's statement on human nature is powerful and very memorable. Hobbes begins by looking at this life in a state of nature. So in a state of nature, how do people live? How do they interact with one another? And his assessment, as you'll see, it's bleak. He says, quote, "If any 2 men desire the same thing, which nevertheless they cannot both enjoy, they become enemies, and in the way to their end, which is principally their own conservation, sometimes their delectation only, endeavor to destroy or subdue one another." What's Hobbes saying here? In the state of nature, you get 2 people, they want the same thing, they both can't have it, bam, violence. They become enemies. That's how it works in a state of nature. They'll do everything they can to destroy or subdue the other. And from hence it comes to pass that where an invader hath no more to fear than another man's single power, if one plant, sow, build, or possess a convenient seat, others may probably be expected to come prepared with forces united to dispossess and deprive him, not only of the fruit of his labor, but also of his life or liberty. And the invader, again, is in the like danger of another. What's he saying here? Nobody's safe. Nobody's secure. Look, like, let's say you live in a state of nature. You've accumulated some property. You've sowed. You've built. You have a decent plot of land. There's nothing stopping an invader from coming in because he has no more to fear than just your individual single power. There's no common power to keep all men in awe. It's just your single power. So, an invader's going to come in. He's going to come in and dispossess and deprive you of the fruit of your labor and probably of your life and liberty as well. Might make you his slave. But the problem is, for that invader, now the invader, upon doing that, is in like danger of the same thing happening to him from somebody else. In the nature of man, Hobbes says, we find 3 principal causes of quarrel. First, competition. Secondly, diffidence. Another way to say that is distrust. Men distrust one another. So competition, distrust, and then glory. The first, competition, Hobbes says, makes men invade for gain. Okay? They want to accumulate. They want more. They want to outdo others. The second cause of quarrel, which is distrust, men invade others for safety. They say, look, I'll be safer if I, take so-and-so's property and add that to my estate and maybe enslave some of the people who live on that property and make them fight and work for me. And the third cause of quarrel, which is glory, the third, glory, makes men invade others for reputation. There's something in man, an ambitious spirit within man that wants glory, that wants that reputation among others. And if you have a strong reputation, if you have a reputation for effectively invading the property of others, maybe that will prevent others from invading you. The first use violence to make themselves masters of other men's persons, wives, children, and cattle. The second, to defend them. The third, for trifles. The state of nature. Violence. What do you see? What are some themes here? Violence, fear, and then ambition. Often for trifles, but it's in the nature of man to desire glory. Hereby it is manifest that during the time men live without a common power to keep them all in awe, stated differently, without a government. During that time, they are in that condition which is called war. In such a war as is of every man against every man. You want to take away government, you're like an anarchist, and you like to romanticize about what it would be like without the state. Here's what it is. It's a war of every man against every man. You may not like that, but that's the fact of the matter. It's built in to human nature. Humans are wired this way, Hobbes says. And then famously, Hobbes describes the state of nature, the condition of man, without this common power. In such condition, there is no place for industry, because the fruit thereof is uncertain, and consequently no culture of the earth, no navigation, nor use of the commodities that may be imported by sea, no commodious building, no instruments of moving and removing such things as require much force, no knowledge of the face of the earth, no account of time, no arts, no letters, no society, and which is worst of all, continual fear and danger of violent death, and the life of man solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Wow. What a condition. The life of man solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. There's the state of nature. You want the state of nature? That's it. What do you think? Is Hobbes correct? Do you agree with Hobbes here? Is this a realistic picture of the natural state of man without this common power? Remember, Hobbes is going to argue that a common power, government, will be erected in order to quit or to escape this condition. Is Hobbes correct that this is the natural condition of man? Hobbes goes on. To this war of every man against every man, this also is consequent, that nothing can be unjust. Now Hobbes is going to get even more controversial here. In the state of nature, nothing can be unjust. The notions of right and wrong, justice and injustice have there no place. Where there is no common power, there is no law. We'll talk about natural law in a moment. Where there is no common power, there is no law. And where no law, no injustice. Force and fraud are in war the two cardinal virtues. Okay, so in the state of nature is a state of war. Every man against every man. And in that state of war, the two cardinal virtues are force and fraud. It is consequent also to the same condition that there can be no propriety, no dominion, no mine and thine distinct, but only that to be every man's that he can get, and for so long as he can keep it. In short, no property rights. Basically, everything's up for the taking. If you have the power and the will to seize something, then there's nothing stopping you from doing that. Nor can it even be called unjust, because there's no law. There is no law. There's no law because there's no common power. The passions that incline men to peace are... Okay, so here we have this war. War of all against all. Every man against every man. Well, what about peace? Now, Hobbes argues here that there are natural passions in man that desire peace. And the passions, Hobbes says, to return to the text, the passions that incline men to peace are fear of death, number one. That's the foremost. Just fear of death. Why do you want peace? Well, I don't want to die. Okay? What's the other passion that inclines men to peace? Number two, desire of such things as are necessary to commodious living. Because remember, in a state of nature, commodious living is impossible. It's not happening. You're just in a constant state of fear and danger of violent death. So fear of death will incline men to peace. The desire for such things as are necessary to commodious living. And number three, and a hope by their industry to obtain them. So those are natural passions in man. Men want these things. And reason, our minds, reason suggesteth convenient articles of peace, upon which men may be drawn to agreement. These articles are they which otherwise are called the laws of nature. Well, these articles of peace, this is what men desire, to escape or to rectify this state of war. So now we turn to natural right and natural law. What does Hobbes say about these? Well, Hobbes believes and asserts a right of nature. But it's a bit different than what John Locke will argue are the rights of nature. Well, by the way, Locke is the next thinker whom we will examine in this series. We're doing Hobbes right now. We'll do Locke next. That's the plan. The right of nature, Hobbes says, which writers commonly call in the Latin jus naturale, is the liberty each man hath to use his own power as he will himself for the preservation of his own nature. So the liberty to use whatever means you have in your own power, according to your own individual will, to preserve your own nature. That is your right in the state of nature. So for the preservation of his own nature, that is to say, of his own life, and consequently of doing anything which in his own judgment and reason he shall conceive to be the aptest means thereunto. Basically, individuals, according to Hobbes, have a natural right to seek to maximize their own well-being and the right to pursue, again, within their own power, whatever they will for themselves as regards the preservation and betterment of their own lives. Now, Hobbes defines liberty. By liberty, he means the absence of external impediments. The absence of external impediments. Liberty, or freedom, Hobbes argues, signifies the absence of opposition, and by opposition he means external impediments of motion. A free man is he that in those things which by his strength and wit he is able to do, is not hindered to do what he has a will to do. So if you want to do something, if you have a will to do something, and you have the means to carry out that will, you have the power to carry out that will, then if you're a free man, you have the liberty to do it. But when the impediment of motion is in the constitution of the thing itself, we say not that it wants the liberty, but the power to move. As when a stone lieth still, or a man is fastened to his bed by sickness. So liberty, again, to return to the previous slide, liberty is the absence of opposition, but external opposition. Someone from the outside, like you as an individual, have the will and the ability to do something, but another party comes in and stops you by force from carrying that out. Liberty does not mean if the impediment of motion comes from within yourself. In that case, if you have a will to do something, but you don't have the ability to do it, we say, well, you don't lack liberty, you lack the power to move. Important distinction there. You could will all you want to live in a mansion, okay? But if you don't have the ability to finance that project or to build such a mansion, no one would say you lack the liberty to have a mansion. No, you lack the power, okay? Important difference. Like a stone that lies still, okay? Just lacks the power to move, or a man fastened to his bed by sickness. So that's the right of nature. If the liberty to do whatever you will, so long as it's within your own power to preserve your own life, to better your own life. Now, the law of nature, lex naturalis, is a precept or general rule, Hobbes writes, found out by reason, by which a man is forbidden to do that which is destructive of his life, or takes away the means of preserving the same. This is the rule found in nature. So you have natural right, and that natural right is broad. All right, whatever you will to do and is within your power to maximize your own well-being, to preserve your life, to improve upon your life, whatever you will to do, you have a right in nature, according to Hobbes. In the state of nature, quote, every man has a right to everything, even to one another's body. Boy, a whole lot of natural law theorists and natural right philosophers would disagree with that one, and as well as yours truly. We'll get to that at the end of this video. But every man has a right to everything, even to one another's body. And therefore, as long as this natural right of every man to everything endures, there can be no security to any man, how strong or wise soever he be. Well, that's inconsistent with this law of nature by which men must do that which will preserve their life. A man is forbidden to do that which is destructive of his life, and yet, in this state of nature, because all men possess this right of nature, there's no safety, there's no security. And consequently, Hobbes says, it is a precept or general rule of reason that every man ought to endeavor peace as far as he has hope of obtaining it. Okay, so this is part of that law of nature. Because man is forbidden to do that which is destructive of his own life, it follows then that they should endeavor peace as far as he has hope of obtaining it. Or alternatively, if you can't obtain peace, that individual may seek and use all helps and advantages of war. So because there's no security. Number one, you ought to endeavor peace. If you can't obtain peace, then you may seek and use all helps and advantages of war. Again, in the state of nature. The first branch of this, that every man ought to endeavor peace as far as he has hope of obtaining it. The first branch of this rule, Hobbes says, contains the first and fundamental law of nature, to seek peace and follow it. It's a law of nature. Why is that a law of nature? Because that will help preserve your life. That will give you security in this war of all against all. So it's a law of nature that you seek peace and follow it. But if you can't obtain peace, you may use all helps and advantages of war. This second branch here, this is the sum of the right of nature, which is by all means we can to defend ourselves. So if you can't obtain peace, you can use any means you want to defend yourself. So, number one, men have a natural right to do anything within their power to preserve their own life, according to Hobbes. Number two, natural law dictates that each man do everything within his power to preserve his own life. Number three, in the state of nature, no man is secure in his life or possessions. And so, it follows, number four, that reason, therefore, dictates that men endeavor peace to preserve their own lives. Make sense? From this fundamental law of nature, Hobbes continues, by which men are commanded to endeavor peace, a law of nature, men are commanded to endeavor peace, is derived the second law of nature, that a man be willing when others are so too. As far forth as for peace and defense of himself, he shall think it necessary to lay down this right to all things, and be contented with so much liberty against other men as he would allow other men against himself. Okay, see things coming together. This is the beginnings of the formation of the social contract. The first law of nature, men are commanded to endeavor peace. Now we have the second law of nature, that a man be willing when others are also willing, to lay down this immense absolute natural right to everything, that you lay down that right found in nature for the sake of peace, and be contented with as much liberty against other men as you would allow other men against yourself. So reason dictates that men seek peace in order to preserve their own lives. It follows then the second law of nature, that men be willing to contrive articles of peace when others are also willing, resulting in the mutual renouncing or transferring of right. What right? This natural right to do anything within your power to preserve or to better your own life. That right will be renounced or transferred in the formation of these articles of peace. Right is laid aside either by simply renouncing it or by transferring it to another. By simply renouncing when the individual cares not to whom the benefit thereof redoundeth. By transferring when he intends the benefit thereof, of laying aside that right, when he intends the benefit thereof to some certain person or persons. Either way, right is laid aside. And when a man hath in either manner abandoned or granted away his right, then is he said to be obliged or bound not to hinder those to whom such right is granted. So when you lay aside that right, renouncing it or transferring it to another, you are now obliged, you are bound not to hinder those to whom such right is granted. And that he ought, and it is duty, not to make void that voluntary act of his own. The deed is done. Right has now been laid aside. Why? Because the state of nature was hellish, okay? It was a war, a continual fear, continual danger, continual war. And so you lay aside right. You lay aside this extreme right that exists in a state of nature. And because you've done that now, you are bound to the sovereign to whom you have renounced or transferred that right. And it's your duty now not to make void that voluntary act of your own. In fact, such hindrance, if you were to hinder the power to whom such right is granted, such hindrance is injustice and injury, the right being before renounced or transferred. The mutual transferring of right is that which men call contract. So, men in this early beginnings of civil society mutually transfer right. It's called contract. And what the ancient philosophers and theologians described as laws of nature, justice, equity, modesty, mercy, doing to others as we would be done to, with Hobbes says, without the terror of some power to cause them to be observed, these are contrary to our natural passions. Our natural passions carry us to partiality, pride, revenge, and the like. So you need the terror of some common power to cause these things to be observed. Without it, it's not going to be observed because it's contrary to our natural passions. And covenants without the sword are but words, and of no strength to secure a man at all. You need the power of the sword. You need Leviathan. Enter Leviathan. Part 5, we'll take a look at that social contract covenant. Here are the discussion questions. What do you think? What do you make of Hobbes' idea of human nature, natural right, natural law? Well, I'll speak for myself here. Opinions will vary depending on the viewer. Maybe some of you are in total agreement with Hobbes. I like a lot of what Hobbes says, but I'm also in sharp disagreement with him in other areas. First of all, as a Christian, it's fundamental Christian doctrine about the total depravity of man since the fall, original sin, radical corruption of man. And if left unchecked, those wicked passions of man are just going to run absolutely wild. So I'm in agreement with Hobbes that in a state of nature, it's a war of all against all. Nasty, poor, Brutish, in short. This is why you need institutions such as civil government. John Calvin described civil government to be, quote, equally as necessary to mankind as bread and water, light and air. Well, why is that? Because of man's natural depravity. You've got to have civil government. And even if such government is corrupt, and most governments throughout all time have been corrupt to one degree or another, but even a corrupt government is necessary to maintain peace and to restrain the natural wicked passions of man found in this state of fallen nature. I'm in agreement with Hobbes on that, and I think those truths are revealed throughout not just Holy Scripture, but also through just nature and through the use of reason, which is why many non-Christian philosophers have also concluded the same thing. I'm thinking, for example, Thomas Sowell has written on extensively on this idea as well. You don't need to believe in God to accept the fallenness, the depravity of man, especially in a state of nature. Now, where I would disagree with Hobbes on the natural condition of mankind, Hobbes does not use the language of good and evil in a state of nature. In fact, Hobbes believes that in the state of nature, humans exist prior to good and evil, that language of good and evil just simply does not apply in a state of nature. It doesn't have really any functional establishment until the creation of civil society. Hobbes would say the state of nature is savage, but it's not evil, that you can't have evil prior to law, and you can't have law prior to the establishment of civil society. And this is where, my disagreement really with Hobbes really starts to come forth. His idea of natural law and natural right, I think, is just way, way off. Because Hobbes, he sees natural law simply as, do whatever you can to preserve your own life. Endeavor peace, and if you can't do that, make war. That's natural law as an individual. And then natural right, basically, as an individual, if you have the will to do something and you have the power to do it, you have the right in nature to do it. So if you're an invader and you believe that it will help preserve your existence if you invade the property of your neighbor and kill or enslave them, you have a right in nature to do that. And that would not violate any law of nature. Of course, could not disagree more with that. And not just, again, not just as a Christian, but even in non-Christian philosophy and some of the old ancient Greek and Roman philosophers, they would assert something very, very entirely different. Know that there is an absolute universal moral law that exists independent of civil society. For Hobbes, everything's dependent on civil society. That is what we would consider natural law to life, liberty, and property. That's dependent on civil society. No, there's an absolute fundamental moral code that it is utterly independent of the state, utterly independent of society. It is universal. It is built into creation. It's hardwired into creation. Paul talks about this in the 2nd chapter of his letter to the Romans. He talks about the law of God, that fundamental moral law is engraved or written on the hearts of all men. All that this moral law, this natural law, is knowable, is discoverable through the use of reason, what Paul and theologians have described as natural revelation. But that man has suppressed that knowledge about God, but also about that moral law of right and wrong. That man has suppressed it. It's been obscured by human depravity. But it is universal. It is absolute. And it's not just Christian theology that asserts this. Cicero wrote about this in his work on the Republic. Almost 100 years before Paul and half a century before Christ, Cicero said this, quote, "There is indeed a law, right reason, which is in accordance with nature, existing in all, unchangeable, eternal, commanding us to do what is right, forbidding us to do what is wrong. It has dominion over good men, but possesses no influence over bad ones. No other law can be substituted for it. No part of it can be taken away, nor can it be abrogated altogether. Neither the people nor the Senate can absolve from it. It is not one thing at Rome and another thing at Athens, one thing today and another thing tomorrow, but it is eternal and immutable for all nations and for all time." Amen. Love that. 100% agreement with Cicero there. There is this absolute moral law. That is natural law. And then natural right derives from natural law. They're inextricably linked. They're not, these two separate entities as Hobbes describes them, but they're inextricably linked. Natural rights just derive from natural law. They can be deduced from natural law. A natural right essentially is a lawful claim based on natural law that individuals have on the rest of society. So, for example, I think Locke gets it right here. Life, liberty, property. Life, liberty, property. 3 of those natural rights. Well, where do these come from? The natural right to life derives from the natural law prohibiting murder. And that natural law prohibiting murder can be discovered through reason, natural revelation, but is also explicitly expressed in the 6th commandment. The 10 commandments is that revealed moral law. The 6th commandment says, "Thou shalt not murder." Ergo, you have a natural right to life. It derives from that natural law. The natural right to property derives from the natural law prohibiting theft. Again, discoverable through reason, found in natural revelation, also found in the 8th commandment, thou shalt not steal. And then the natural right to liberty includes this general right to pursue and to conduct actions that do not violate any universal moral laws. And you find this in, Christ sums it up. Love your neighbor as yourself. Love your neighbor as yourself. Do to others as you would have them do to you. Life, liberty, property. That invader in this, let's say, state of nature, outside of government, there's no government. We're in a state of nature. That invader who wants to come and take my life, he does not, because of that natural law prohibiting murder, he does not have a right to take my life. He would be in violation of that natural law. I would have a natural right to defend my life, but he cannot take my life. There's no right there for him to do so, nor can he take my property. That would not be a right that he possesses in a state of nature. Nor would it be his right to enslave me. That would violate my natural right to liberty. Okay? You see how vastly different that is from Hobbes's world of the Hobbesian state of nature, where really everything's up for grabs. And so disagree sharply with Hobbes on that point. Really, though Hobbes was not an atheist, he defended the existence of God utilizing, I believe he used the cosmological argument. Nonetheless, you can understand why his contemporaries charged him with atheism, because you read Leviathan and you read that his description of the state of nature, and it is godless. Where is God in his description of the state of nature? It's just not there. And then how he describes natural right, natural law. God just doesn't factor in at all. And so that's where I fall. I appreciate very much, actually, Hobbes's description of the condition of man in the state of nature, of the war of all against all. I think it's brilliant. It's just golden stuff, his description. Okay, it's almost poetic the way he describes it. I think he gets the right and the law wrong. And another thing I admire about Hobbes is his description of social contract and the need for Leviathan. But for the same reason, I think he gets some things wrong here. After the formation of the contract, from Hobbes' perspective, when he says you are bound to the sovereign, he means it. Like, rebellion in really any situation is off limits at that point, as Hobbes sees it. And if you have a proper understanding of natural right and natural law, as I just described it from a Christian perspective, or as Cicero described it from a pre-Christian perspective, then you're going to have some sharp disagreements with Hobbes on the question of resisting or rebelling against a tyrannical sovereign. We'll get to all that. Part 5, we'll take a look at the social contract. Hope you enjoyed this video. Hey, answer some of the questions below. Let me know what you think. Do you agree with Hobbes? What do you make of it? And I'll see you next time. Bye.